It all started with something as ordinary as a family barbecue, the kind that fills the air with laughter, sizzling food, and summer sunshine. But what should have been a simple, joyful afternoon quickly turned into a spark for one of the most dramatic neighborhood confrontations the Johnson family had ever faced. Because just beyond their backyard fence stood Karen, the one neighbor who seemed determined to ruin every moment of happiness. The summer sun had a way of painting everything in golden warmth, and that Saturday was no different. The Johnson family had been looking forward to this day all week. The kids had just finished their chores, the grill had been cleaned and polished, and the cooler was packed with drinks and ice. For them, a backyard cookout wasn't just about food. It was about family, about laughter, about holding on to moments that would one day become cherished memories. Mr. David Johnson, a tall man with steady hands and a broad smile, stood proudly by the grill in his apron. He had always been the grill master, known among friends and relatives for turning simple cuts of meat into smoky perfection. His wife, Angela, moved gracefully through the backyard, setting up a long folding table with paper plates, napkins, and a spread of side dishes she'd been preparing since early morning. Their children, 12-year-old Marcus and 8-year-old Nia, ran across the yard playing tag, their giggles filling the air. Even the family dog, a playful golden retriever named Duke, seemed to sense the excitement, bounding after the kids with his tail wagging furiously. Everything about the afternoon felt perfect, until the faint sound of screen door slamming echoed from across the fence. Angela paused mid-step, her hand holding a stack of cups, and exchanged a knowing look with her husband. They didn't need to see who it was. That sound belonged to one person, and one person only, Karen. Karen lived directly next door, in a house that looked as immaculate as a model home. Her lawn was cut to precise perfection, every hedge trimmed like it had been sculpted by an artist. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything. When trash cans weren't rolled in fast enough, when someone parked slightly crooked, when kids played too loudly in the street. And she didn't just notice, she acted. She called, complained, wrote letters, and even stormed over in person. To the Johnsons, she wasn't just Karen. She was HOA Karen, the self-appointed guardian of every rule and regulation, whether they existed or not. David exhaled slowly, flipping a rack of ribs over the grill. The sizzle of meat clashed with the uneasy silence that settled between him and Angela. They didn't want to give Karen power over their joy, but deep down, they knew what was coming. From the other side of the wooden fence, there was a sharp sniffing sound, like someone inhaling deeply through their nose. And then her voice, sharp, shrill, unmistakable. "Is that smoke I smell?" Karen called out, her words slicing through the air like an alarm bell. Angela rolled her eyes and kept arranging the cups, refusing to acknowledge her. David, however, clenched his jaw. He wanted the day to stay peaceful, but experience told him peace was not in Karen's vocabulary. "Yes, Karen," he finally answered, keeping his tone even. "We're grilling this afternoon." There was a pause. Then, the sound of footsteps crunching across gravel. A moment later, Karen appeared at the edge of her yard, leaning over the fence. Her blonde hair was pulled tight into a bun, and she wore a floral blouse that seemed far too formal for a Saturday afternoon. In one hand, she carried a clipboard, because of course she did. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Do you know how far that smoke is going to travel? Do you know how unhealthy that is? I can smell it from my porch." Angela straightened, finally turned to face her. "It's a barbecue, Karen. People grill. It's summer." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Not in this neighborhood. Not under HOA guidelines. I'll have you know that grilling within 50 feet of another property line is strictly prohibited." She tapped her clipboard as though it held the very laws of the land. David almost laughed. He had read the HOA handbook cover to cover when they bought the house 2 years ago. There was no such rule. Karen, as usual, was making things up. "We're not breaking any rules," David said firmly. "We've checked." Karen pursed her lips, clearly annoyed that her authority was being questioned. Whether it's written down or not, it's inconsiderate. People don't want smoke in their yards. People don't want noise. By people, of course, she meant herself. Angela's patience was already wearing thin, but she forced a smile. Well, Karen, we're almost done setting up. You might want to close your windows if the smell bothers you. Karen gasped as though she had been insulted in the deepest way possible. Close my windows? Are you kidding me? This is my home, and I have the right to fresh air. If you think you're going to turn this into some block party, you've got another thing coming. The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Marcus, who had stopped playing tag, tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, are we in trouble? He asked quietly. Angela knelt down and smoothed his hair. No, baby, we're not in trouble. Some people just don't like it when others have fun. Karen scowled at the sight of the family carrying on with their preparations, her eyes darting from the sizzling grill to the children laughing. Something about their joy seemed to ignite her anger even more. She tapped her clipboard again, muttering something under her breath, before finally storming back toward her porch. David watched her go, shaking his head. Well, that didn't take long. Angela sighed. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist. She probably smelled the charcoal the second we lit it. For a few moments, they tried to shake it off. The grill hissed and popped. The kids returned to their game, and music began to play from a speaker on the patio. But Karen's presence lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. They all knew this wasn't over. And it wasn't. From her porch, Karen watched, arms folded tightly across her chest. Every laugh, every clink of a plate, every puff of smoke seemed to push her closer to the edge. She wasn't just irritated. She was furious. Furious that her perfect, orderly neighborhood was being ruined by the Johnsons' joy. Furious that her demands hadn't been immediately obeyed. Furious that, for once, her authority wasn't enough to stop something she didn't like. As the smell of ribs and burgers filled the air, neighbors walking by slowed down, drawn by the inviting aroma. Some waved, smiling, and called out greetings to the Johnsons. A few even joked about grabbing a plate. Each cheerful exchange was another twist of the knife for Karen. By the time Angela set down the final dish on the table, a big bowl of homemade potato salad, Karen had disappeared inside her house. But David knew better than to think she was gone. No, she was plotting, waiting, watching. And as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the backyard in shades of orange and gold, the Johnson family had no idea that their simple Saturday barbecue was about to ignite a battle that would divide the neighborhood and call the police to their doorstep. Because for HOA Karen, the scent of grilled food wasn't just smoke. To her, it was a smell of defiance. The barbecue smoke curled lazily into the summer air, but inside the Johnson household, the story of their ran much deeper than sizzling ribs and potato salad. To really understand why that Saturday afternoon meant so much, you had to know the family behind the grill, the people who had built their lives with patience, grit, and love, and who never asked for more than the simple right to enjoy it in peace. David Johnson had grown up in Atlanta, the son of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. His father taught him the value of hard work, fixing cars in a cramped garage with grease-stained hands, while his mother filled their small home with books and lessons about dignity, education, and standing tall no matter what the world threw at you. By the time David was in college, he had inherited both of their strengths: the discipline to put in hours of work without complaint and the intelligence to climb higher than anyone had expected. He majored in engineering, and while many of his classmates were caught up in the party scene, David spent nights studying, holding part-time jobs to cover tuition, and mailing whatever extra money he could back home. Years later, his success in the tech industry wasn't a miracle. It was the product of countless sacrifices, both his and his parents. Angela, on the other hand, had grown up in the Midwest, in a close-knit community where everyone knew each other's names and neighbors borrowed sugar without hesitation. Her parents had run a small catering business, and Angela practically grew up in a kitchen, learning how food could bring people together. She loved the way a shared meal could soften conflicts, create friendships, and heal broken hearts. By the time she met David, she was managing a restaurant, balancing spreadsheets and cooking schedules with the same ease she now balanced her family's life. Their love story wasn't flashy. They met through mutual friends, discovered a shared taste for old jazz records, and fell in love slowly, steadily, like a fire that grew brighter the longer it burned. When they married, it wasn't just two people coming together. It was two families, two histories, blending into one. When Marcus was born, David held him in a hospital room with tears in his eyes, whispering promises about the life he would give his son. When little Nia arrived 4 years later, Angela laughed through her exhaustion, saying their family finally felt complete. To their children, the Johnson home was a place of safety, warmth, and encouragement. David often told Marcus stories about his grandfather, about the grease on his hands, and the pride in fixing something with hard work. Angela taught Nia recipes from her mother, passing down traditions in bowls of mac and cheese and trays of cornbread. Together, the Johnsons built a home that was more than just four walls. It was a place of joy, a place where the sound of laughter echoed through the hallways, where birthdays were celebrated with too much cake, and where even tough times were faced hand in hand. And it wasn't just within their walls. The Johnsons made an effort to be part of their community. They hosted potlucks, helped elderly neighbors carry groceries, and invited kids over for backyard games. Angela baked pies for new families on the street, and David offered his tools or handyman skills whenever someone needed them. Over time, their presence became woven into the fabric of the neighborhood, which is why so many of their neighbors liked them, respected them, even when Marcus mowed lawns in the summer. Families tipped him extra, knowing he was saving for something important. When Nia sold cookies for her school fundraiser, neighbors lined up to buy boxes, smiling at her charm. People didn't just tolerate the Johnsons. They embraced them. Everyone, that is, except Karen. Karen had moved into the neighborhood long before the Johnsons, and in her mind, that gave her seniority. She often reminded newcomers that she had seen this place change, and not always for the better. She wasn't openly cruel, at least not at first, but her subtle remarks, her judgmental stares, and her obsession with enforcing rules revealed something darker. For Karen, the Johnsons represented everything she couldn't control. They were well-liked. They were successful. They fit in without needing her approval. And deep down, she couldn't stand it. The tension between Karen and the Johnsons hadn't started that Saturday. It had been brewing for months. There was a time Marcus and a few neighborhood kids played basketball in the driveway, and Karen complained about too much noise. There was a time Angela hosted a small dinner party, and Karen left a note about excessive cars parked on the street. Even Halloween had been an issue. Karen accused the Johnsons of giving out candy too late at night, as though cheerful trick-or-treaters were a crime. Still, the Johnsons never let her bitterness consume their joy. They brushed off her complaints, choosing instead to focus on the neighbors who did care about them. Mrs. Ramirez from 2 doors down often brought Angela fresh vegetables from her garden. The Thompsons, a retired couple across the street, adored Marcus and Nia and frequently joined them for Sunday dinners. Even the kids in the neighborhood gravitated toward the Johnsons' backyard, where they could count on snacks, laughter, and open arms. On the day of the barbecue, that bond was obvious. As the ribs cooked and the music flowed through the yard, a few neighbors waved from the sidewalk, asking what's cooking, and smells amazing over there. The Johnsons always welcomed the interaction, shouting back invitations and telling people to stop by for a plate. David knew that some people worked hard their whole lives and never built a community like this. That's what made Karen's hostility so much sharper. She wasn't just being petty. She was trying to poison something that was rare and beautiful, a neighborhood where people actually cared for one another. As the evening sun lit up the sky, Marcus helped his father carry trays of chicken wings and burgers to the table. Angela wiped her brow, laughing as she arranged everything neatly, her pride obvious. Nia skipped around with Duke at her heels, squealing with joy. From the corner of her eye, Angela caught sight of Karen's curtains twitching. Even when she wasn't outside, Karen was watching, always watching. Angela turned back to the table, forcing herself not to let it sour the moment. "She's not going to ruin this for us," she whispered under her breath. David overheard, setting a firm hand on her shoulder. "She won't. We've built too much here to let her take it away." What they didn't realize was that Karen was already plotting her next move. In her mind, this wasn't just about smoke or noise. This was about control, about reminding everyone who really owned the neighborhood. And she wasn't about to lose. From behind her lace curtains, Karen's sharp eyes followed every movement in the Johnsons' backyard. She watched the smoke drifting from the grill, the children laughing, the dog weaving in and out of the crowd of chairs. Each sound of joy felt like a personal insult. To her, it wasn't just noise. It was defiance. Against her, against the rules, against the quiet order she believed she alone protected in this neighborhood. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. The slam of her back door echoed like a gunshot, making Marcus glance toward the fence nervously. Karen marched across her lawn with that same rigid determination the Johnsons had come to know too well. Her shoes crunch against the gravel, her floral blouse stiff in the evening breeze. Angela leaned toward David. "Here we go again," she murmured, forcing a smile for the kids even as her stomach tightened. By the time Karen reached the fence line, her face was already flushed with indignation. She placed both hands on the wooden panels, leaning forward like a lawyer about to deliver closing arguments. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she snapped, her voice cutting through the music. "I told you earlier, and now I'm saying it again, grilling is against HOA policy. You need to put that fire out immediately before I escalate this further." David slowly set down the tongs in his hand, taking a breath before answering. He had promised himself he wouldn't let her ruin this day, but there was only so much a man could swallow in silence. "Karen, there's no policy against backyard grilling," he replied evenly. "I've read the HOA handbook cover to cover. Families here grill all the time." Karen scoffed, her hand tightening on the fence. "Not like this. Not with smoke pouring everywhere, music blaring, and half the neighborhood loitering on the sidewalk waiting for free food. It's disruptive, unsanitary, and frankly, it's a violation of community standards." Angela turned from the table, her patience fraying. "Community standards? The community seems to be enjoying themselves just fine, Karen. Maybe you're the only one with a problem." Karen's eyes narrowed into slits. "Don't talk back to me, Angela. I've lived here 15 years. I know what this neighborhood is supposed to look like. I know what's appropriate and what isn't. You've only been here 2, and already you think you can turn it into some kind of circus." The words stung, not because they carried truth, but because they revealed Karen's real feelings. This wasn't about smoke or sound. This was about control, about power, about who belonged and who didn't. David stepped closer to the fence, meeting her glare with calm defiance. "Karen, with all due respect, we're not breaking any rules. Our grill is in our yard, our music isn't blasting, and our guests are welcome here. If you don't like it, you can go inside and close your windows. But we're not shutting down our family barbecue." For a moment, silence fell. Even the children stopped moving, sensing the tension in the air. The only sound was the faint crackle of ribs sizzling over the flames. Karen's lips trembled with outrage. She wasn't used to being challenged. Most people in the neighborhood avoided conflict with her, preferring to give in rather than deal with her tirades. But the Johnsons weren't bending, and that infuriated her. "You think you're above the rules," she hissed. "You think because you're popular with the neighbors that you can do whatever you want. But let me tell you something. This neighborhood has order because of people like me, people who enforce the rules. Without me, this place would fall apart." Angela crossed her arms, her voice cool. "Karen, no one made you the sheriff of this block. If you're unhappy, maybe you should talk to the actual HOA board instead of harassing us every time you see smoke. Karen's face twisted, and for a moment, David thought she might climb right over the fence. Instead, she jabbed a finger through the air. You'll regret this. Don't think I won't take action. You're disturbing the peace, and I won't stand for it. If the HOA won't handle this, I'll call the authorities myself. The word hung heavy. Authorities. Marcus tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering nervously, Dad, are the police going to come? David knelt down, steadying his son with a firm hand on his shoulder. No, son, we're not doing anything wrong. Don't worry. But as he stood, his jaw tightened. He knew Karen's threats weren't empty. She had a reputation for following through, whether it was calling animal control over a barking dog or reporting kids for riding their bikes too fast down the street. She thrived on confrontation, and the Johnsons had just given her another excuse. Karen leaned back on the fence, her eyes still burning. Last warning, she declared. Shut it down, or I'll shut it down for you. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back toward her porch, her clipboard tucked firmly under her arm. The Johnsons stood frozen for a moment, the energy of the gathering dampened by her venom. Finally, Angela broke the silence. You know she's not going to let this go. David sighed, glancing back at the grill. No, she's not, but neither are we. The children slowly resumed their play, though their laughter carried a note of uncertainty now. Angela busied herself at the table, but her movements were sharper, less relaxed. And David, though outwardly calm, kept his eyes on Karen's porch, waiting for her next move. Sure enough, not 10 minutes later, Karen reappeared. This time she didn't speak. She just stood on her porch with her arms crossed, glaring at the Johnsons like a hawk circling its prey. Every bite of food, every burst of laughter, every clink of a glass seemed to deepen her scowl. Some of the neighbors noticed, too. Mrs. Ramirez, passing by with a basket of fresh tomatoes, shook her head. Don't pay her any mind, she told Angela quietly. She's always been like this. You're doing nothing wrong. Angela smiled weakly, grateful for support, but in her heart, she knew Mrs. Ramirez was right. Karen had always been like this, and tonight was only the beginning, because when Karen set her sights on someone, she didn't stop. Not until she felt she had won. Karen's voice cut through the warm afternoon air like a knife. She didn't just shout across the fence this time. She marched right through the side gate, pushing it open as though the Johnsons' yard somehow belonged to her too. Her heels dug into the grass, and her face was tight with anger. Smoke curled gently from the grill where Michael Johnson was carefully turning ribs, and the air was thick with the aroma of barbecue sauce and spice. To the family, it was a scent of love and tradition. To Karen, it was an excuse to assert control. Enough, she barked, startling the kids who had been tossing a ball around near the garden. Put that fire out right now. This is not a campground, and you are disturbing the peace of this neighborhood. Michael froze for a second, spatula in hand, then slowly turned his head toward her. Beside him, his wife Angela wiped her hands on a towel, her brows raised in disbelief. It wasn't just what Karen said, it was how she said it, as if she were the sheriff of the block, and they were trespassers on their own land. Good afternoon to you too, Karen, Michael said evenly, trying to keep his tone respectful. We're just having a little family cookout. We're not disturbing anyone. Karen snorted. Not disturbing anyone? The entire street can smell it. This is against HOA regulations. No open flames. No cooking smells spreading into other people's property. It's in the handbook. She jabbed a finger toward the grill, her eyes narrowing. Angela folded her arms across her chest. I've read that handbook front to back, Karen. There's no rule against grilling in our own backyard. People do it every summer. The Taylors grilled last week. You didn't seem to have a problem with that. That's different. Karen snapped, her voice rising an octave. The Taylors don't set up like it's some kind of block party. They're respectful. She waved a dismissive hand toward the Johnsons. "You people just think you can do whatever you want without regard for the neighborhood's image." The words hung in the air, and Angela felt a sting behind them. You people. It wasn't the first time Karen had used those words, and everyone understood what they implied. Angela took a slow breath, determined not to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing her upset. Michael set down the spatula and stepped closer, keeping his voice firm but calm. "Karen, grilling in our backyard is not against the rules. And frankly, the smell of good food traveling across the neighborhood isn't a disturbance. It's summer. Families are outside. That's what this season is about." Karen tilted her chin upward, trying to look superior. "Don't lecture me, Michael. I'm the HOA secretary, and I know exactly what the guidelines say. If you don't stop now, I'll be forced to file an official complaint with the board. And trust me, they will not be pleased." Angela exchanged a look with her husband. She could see the flicker of frustration in his eyes, though his voice remained steady. "You can file whatever complaint you like. Karen, we're not breaking any rules. And we're not shutting down our family gathering just because you don't approve." The children had gone quiet, their eyes darting nervously between their parents and the intruding neighbor. Even little Jasmine, who had been helping set the picnic table, clutched her doll a little tighter. The tension was thick enough to cut. Karen, sensing the resistance, leaned closer to the grill as though her proximity alone could smother the flames. "This is your final warning," she hissed. "Turn it off, or I'll take it to the board. You'll regret ignoring me." Angela's patience was thinning, but she forced a smile. "Karen, with all due respect, we are not shutting down our grill. If you feel the need to run to the board, then go ahead. We'll be right here, enjoying our dinner." Michael gently put an arm around his wife's shoulder, guiding her back toward the patio table, signaling that there was no point in further arguing. Karen lingered, her lips pressed into a thin line, as though daring them to change their minds. When it became clear that they wouldn't, she spun on her heel and stormed out, the gate slamming behind her. For a moment, the family stood in silence. The kids looked unsettled, the joy of the afternoon disrupted by the venomous intrusion. Michael took a deep breath, tried to reset the atmosphere. He picked up the spatula again, forcing a small smile. "All right," he said, his voice warm but weary. "Let's not let her ruin our day. We've got ribs on the grill and music waiting to be played." Angela nodded, though she couldn't shake the sting of Karen's words. She caught the eyes of her children and smiled reassuringly. "Everything's fine," she said softly. "We're still going to have a wonderful time." But inside, a plan was beginning to take shape. Karen had made her move, issuing her command and threat. What she didn't know was that the Johnsons weren't about to let intimidation spoil their joy. If she wanted to fight over something as simple and pure as a family barbecue, they would respond, not with anger, but with something stronger. Angela exchanged a glance with Michael, one that spoke volumes without words. They weren't going to give in, and if Karen wanted to escalate, then maybe it was time to show her what real community looked like. As Michael flipped the ribs once more, the scent rising into the summer air, Angela quietly pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, her mind already racing. Maybe it was time to turn this moment into something bigger, something that could not only defend their right to enjoy their backyard, but also remind the neighborhood what togetherness really meant. The kids began to smile again as the music returned, and the sound of laughter started to rise once more. Karen's visit had shaken them, but it had not broken them. In fact, in some strange way, it had united them even more. They were already beginning to think ahead, not just about finishing their dinner, but about what might come next. Karen had delivered her order, expecting obedience. Instead, she had sparked something much larger than she could ever control. The evening sun dipped lower over the Johnsons' backyard, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The remnants of smoke from the grill still drifted lightly, carrying with it the scent of seasoned chicken and charred vegetables. The tension from Karen's intrusion hung in the air like an uninvited guest. Michael Johnson sat back in his chair, rubbing his temple, while his wife Denise quietly collected used plates from the table. Their children had retreated indoors, unsettled by Karen's outburst, and their closest friends lingered, exchanging uneasy glances. For a moment, it seemed the night had been ruined, but in that silence, a different kind of energy began to form. Michael sighed and broke the quiet. "She really thinks she can tell us what we can and can't do in our own backyard," he muttered, his voice equal parts frustration and disbelief. Denise gave him a gentle but firm look. "That's what people like her thrive on, control. If we let her dictate tonight, then she wins." Their neighbor, Jamal, leaned forward with a grin, creeping onto his face. "Then don't let her win. If she wants us to stop, why not do the opposite?" The idea landed softly at first, just words tossed out in frustration. But soon it began to spark something bigger. They gathered closer, pulling their chairs into a circle as if huddling for strategy. Denise raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean the opposite?" Jamal's grin widened. "She doesn't want us grilling? Then let's not just grill. Let's make it the biggest cookout this neighborhood has ever seen. Invite everyone. Feed everyone. Show her that we aren't the problem. Her attitude is." The thought lingered in the air, growing louder in their minds the longer it sat there. It was bold, maybe even risky, but it carried the flavor of sweet defiance. At first, Michael hesitated. He wasn't the type to seek confrontation. As a father and provider, he'd always leaned toward keeping peace, avoiding unnecessary conflict, especially in a community where he and his family already stood out as one of the few black households. But Denise placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Think about it, Mike. If we cancel tonight, she'll just feel more powerful. But if we show her kindness, show everyone else joy, she'll expose herself as a real troublemaker." The neighbors chimed in with agreement. Mrs. Hernandez from 2 doors down, who had joined them for dinner, spoke up warmly. "Michael, your family has always brought people together. Remember the block cleanup you organized last spring? Everyone showed up because of you. This could be the same. But this time, it's about standing tall." Michael looked around the circle, taking the faces of his supportive community. The hesitation on his face slowly gave way to determination. He nodded once firmly. "All right then, let's do it." Excitement began to ripple through the small group like sparks catching fire. Phones came out of pockets, messages flew across neighborhood group chats, and word of mouth carried faster than they imagined. Jamal suggested they frame it as an impromptu summer kickoff barbecue, a community celebration open to all. Denise loved the idea, immediately brainstorming menu expansions. She rattled off dishes: potato salad, baked beans, cornbread, grilled corn. Mrs. Hernandez offered to bring homemade tamales, while another neighbor promised racks of ribs from his smoker. What had begun as a small family evening was quickly transforming into a full-scale neighborhood feast. Inside the house, the Johnson children peeked out, curious about the sudden surge of laughter and chatter. Michael's son, Isaiah, asked cautiously, "Dad, are we still going to stop like that lady said?" Michael crouched down to his son's level and shook his head with a smile. "No, son, we're not stopping. We're going to do something better. We're going to celebrate with everyone." Isaiah's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement only children could radiate. "Can I help?" Michael ruffled his hair. "You bet. You're on corn duty." As the night stretched on, the family and their close friends busied themselves with preparations. Denise pulled out tablecloths, paper plates, and the good plastic cups she had saved for a larger gathering. Jamal fetched extra chairs from his garage. Even the Johnsons' teenage daughter, Maya, got on board, designing colorful signs on poster boards that read, "Community barbecue tonight. Everyone welcome." They planned to tape them near the mailbox cluster and at the end of the street. For every smile and laugh that filled the Johnsons' yard, there was also a hum of nervous anticipation. They all knew Karen wouldn't take this lightly. It was one thing for her to bark complaints across a fence, but another to see the Johnsons openly expand their gathering. She had already threatened to call the HOA, and if she saw what was coming tomorrow, she might escalate further. But instead of discouraging them, the thought only added fuel to their determination. Denise put it best when she said, "If we spend our lives shrinking to make others comfortable, we'll never live free. This is our chance to set the tone." As the stars began to emerge in the night sky, Michael sat back and looked at what was unfolding. His yard buzzed with activity. Friends sketching out shopping lists, neighbors texting invitations, and kids running around laughing again. The heaviness from earlier had been replaced with hope. He realized that the night Karen tried to ruin might actually become one of the most memorable turning points of their time in this community. Later that night, after the neighbors left and the Johnsons tidied up, Michael and Denise stood together on the porch. The street was quiet again, but there was a new electricity in the air. Denise leaned into him and whispered, "Tomorrow's going to be big." Michael nodded, staring across the fence where Karen's yard sat dark and silent. For a moment, he imagined her standing behind her curtains, watching, already plotting her next move. But instead of fear, he felt a steady calm. This time, they weren't facing her alone. When the Johnsons finally went inside, the preparations for their bold idea were already set in motion. The guest list was growing, the food list was expanding, and the plan was clear. Turn Karen's attempt to silence them into a celebration she couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about grilling anymore. It was about community, dignity, and refusing to let pettiness control their joy. The Johnsons were ready to turn the tables.